And we are live for our 96th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode. We're excited to be here. We are following the format that we've or the cadence that we've fallen into where we have a guest every other week. This week will just be me and Ken. We got a number of topics that we want to cover, but just hope everyone's staying safe out there as things open back up. But wherever you lie on the political landscape, I guess. So there's first things first, right? There's a lot going on in the industry in general as far as research and online conferences. I did see that OWASP was going to have another online training sessions, like 2 or 3 of them over the course of the summer. So if you're interested in those, please sign up, check out what they're doing. I don't think they've decided on who the trainers are going to be yet, or the CFT is open. In addition to that, our course will be virtual for Black Hat USA. So if you are interested in learning about secure code review from an offensive perspective, please sign up. And we'll also be at Black Hat Europe. It got picked up for Black Hat Europe as well. Right now, it's supposed to be in November, but we'll see if that's virtual or actually in person. I don't have a lot of confidence right now that it will be in person, but you never know. Things can change. Yeah. So outside of that, we'll just dive into topics, right? I know from just a general what we're working on perspective, one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was fuzzing, right? I've got an ongoing project that I've been working on that is I'm helping a customer build out basically a fuzz library for their SDK that they provide to developers to interact with their backend tool, right? Or their backend. And it's been an interesting project to determine what should be used in order to test things properly, right? You've got a multitude of different fuzz lists that are out there, right? Daniel Miesler has his sec list, which is very kind of web focused or bug bounty focused. You've got FuzzDB that does jump in a little bit into like printf and other things. You've got Redamsa that'll just do straight like random strings. But what I wanted to ask you, Ken, and I know we've kind of covered this in the past that I've done, we've talked about security unit testing and testing in the pipeline. We have static analysis tools, which we're going to get to in a little bit too, based on a Twitter thread that just happened this morning. But from a strict fuzzing perspective, what is it that you recommend? What is it that you've used in the past? How do you go about approaching fuzzing in general when you are analyzing an application or running some sort of a dynamic assessment?
Yeah, I haven't done a pure dynamic assessment without code for a long time. So
yeah,
usually it's just dependent on I don't know if you do this, but sometimes I'll just see things that seem I'll see inputs that I know should be fuzzed, whether it's a SQL call or if it's I don't know, suspect. I've had this before with templated HTML generation templates inside of frameworks, where I'm not really the documentation's kind of sketchy on what the operators do, and so I've definitely thrown a fuzzer at those type of applications where I'm pretty sure the templating operators, one of them is going to be vulnerable. I just don't know, this actually has happened. I think it was with .js. I think it was .js. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. I honestly can't remember. But anyways, those are the instances where I see anything with a file sort of upload where so many applications today are just throwing it up on S3, but if they're doing like custom file uploads and they're storing it somewhere, that's a good time to start fuzzing for size limitations, for like MIME type bypasses, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Yeah. So for me, it's like just knowing exactly what anymore. I don't just like put in a URL and just start crawling and scanning. I just don't have the need to do that anymore. I've got the code sitting right in front of me. So.
Well, and that's kind of what I wanted to get to, right? Like, I feel like, well, and maybe this is just, having been in the industry, we've done so many dynamic assessments over the years that like kind of one size fits all, we're just scanning to scan, feels very, 2008 or 2007-ish, right? Like that was what we used, what AppScan for back in the day, or Web Inspect, where you'd send it a URL, you'd get really concerned about logging into the application so it could reach everything, and you just press go. As opposed to kind of this targeted scan approach that we take nowadays. And I still think I need to revisit Sputter, right? The whole idea.
Oh, right, yeah.
Because that's what it's about, right? Is you've got some sort of a CI/CD pipeline. You want to test your application. I want targeted fuzzing, right? I want targeted testing against sensitive endpoints. Burp Suite does this really well with Intruder, right? Is, okay, this looks suspicious. Guess what? I'm going to send it to Intruder, and I'm going to limit my testing to these 2 parameters and do X, Y, Z. You know what I mean? And so instead of, all right, I'm just like scanning the entire site and trying to find everything that I possibly can, you're limiting it to specific payloads and specific endpoints.
I don't want to like discount. I should probably put this closer. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I should. Yeah. Well, one thing I was going to throw out there too is that like there's definitely value in scanning the entire application stack, the entire application, all the application endpoints. There is some value in periodically doing that. And I'll tell you, and I know you know this, but just for those watching, there's times where some libraries behave differently in production than they do in, say, development or even staging. Sometimes it is simply because your application is like has a different configuration in production than it has in development or staging. Some of that's hard to uncover if you're just trying to like fuzz it locally, or in staging. Obviously, you need to see that and happen in production. But the other part is like web server based, right? So like when you run a local dev server, typically you're not running the same exact stack. I mean, I guess it's getting with like Docker and containerization and like Docker Compose, it's getting a little bit closer to matching up with production. But yeah, in general, the production web server differs from what you're running locally. So you have to kind of just see how it behaves, because it may not behave like a perfect example was when we were running an application. We talk about this in the course as an example. When we were running this application in production, there was a configuration issue, and if you didn't pass it a certain parameter, it dropped the OAuth client ID in secret as an exception message, which you would never see in development. It was purely in like a production environment that you would see that. That's one example we've had where the web server, and I say we, I don't mean like GitHub, I just mean like in general. I've had issues with web servers that reflect back content. If there's a couple reasons. One I'd seen it was like a Sinatra app, or I think it was a Sinatra app. Like, this is back in my Living Social days, where if you didn't supply one of the parameters it expected, like it actually had a list of parameters. Oh, sorry. If you supplied a parameter that wasn't in the list of acceptable parameters, it would just echo back the parameter name and like, hey, this parameter is not supposed to be passed in, but like obviously it reflected back with no escaping. So, easy cross-site scripting, no CSP back then. And And that was only detectable in production. So anyways, that's my long-winded way of saying like there's still value in it. It's just most times, yeah, for me, it's more targeted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to talk about, well, you bring up a good point with production and validation when things go into production. This is a strange fight that I always have though, as a consultant coming into an organization, because like inevitably, right? And this even happened within the past couple of weeks. Somebody wants us to test in production, which is fine, but they've never done a pen test in production before, right? And so like if I can take down your web server with a single tool that's running 10 threads because of like some redirect proxy that you have sitting in front of your application, that's a bad thing. And you should know that before I walk in the door. Right. And like
that, you know, I feel like those are the times where you realize if you work for a good consulting company or manager or not, because how many times have you gotten that call on like a Friday night or a, you know, whatever, like at night where like, oh, the customer's hot because you brought down their server and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I used 10 threads on Burp and your shitty site can't handle it. Like, yeah. You know what I mean? It really does come down to like your company's response to that. If they're like, yeah, no, we just uncovered a massive critical issue for you, like, you're welcome. Like, you'll receive your invoice in a day or two. Yeah. You know, I mean,
well, and you know, and to be fair, right, that's basically how the customer responded. Is they were like, crap, can you just turn that off? And I was like, sure, right? Like, you know, we stopped what we were doing. And in this case, I think we were using Fuzz faster, right? But the only thing that we were doing was directory enumeration, right? And so it wasn't actually hitting the backend application. It was honestly like an Nginx like redirect, or I don't know if it was Nginx, but whatever, like sitting in front that was parsing the path and then deciding whether or not it went to the application or not. But because we were sending 10 threads at it, it just couldn't handle this amount of like, you know, oh, it looks like you're making, oh, I can't remember exactly, but they're like, oh, you're making like 3,000 or like, you know, 3,000 requests a minute or something like that. And I'm like, and right? And I'm like, well, it's taken down this like one component. And like, after we talked about it, I sent them over like, okay, this is the actual command I'm running. They're like, great, we're going to put that into our like testing pipeline. Right. I'm like, good. Right. Like, so you guys actually like, they learned from it. I mean, again, I learned from it because I was like, I didn't think it's very rare that we take down a site when we're doing application penetration testing. It just is, right? Yeah. But you know, just like some of those simple fuzz things you just don't expect, and you never know what's going to happen. So depending on the organization, testing and production is always this kind of weird use case. Not to mention, like you find an ability to delete somebody else's object, right? Like through insecure direct object reference. And you don't realize that it's actually being successful. Oh, like this has honestly happened to me before, right? And so like we like delete some, and then I'm like, oh shit!
Oh man, right? It's happened to me too.
What do I? And then I'm like, I'm scrambling. I'm sending them like, I hope you have backups, right? Like I'm like, this is why I like to test in QA or staging, where at the very least I know I'm not going to take this crap out, right? And it's, but like I understand, yeah. Yeah.
I got a story about that for you, actually, just real quick. When I worked contracted for the Pentagon, you know, like the way it worked was we scanned people that I think we talked about this a couple episodes ago. Scanned. We did our assessments on people that connect to the backbone. So it's like you got all your different agencies. Some it's Army, some it's something else, whatever, right? So the agencies would connect in. We'd have to do the assessments. So on one of these, it was like I think it was a supply based agency. I can't really remember. Anyways, they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna give you staging, right? Perfect. Okay, cool. We're gonna test staging. Well, they had an endpoint where, so like, you know, Burp just in any crawler, you know how it works. It just looks for an href link, goes to that, parses for additional href links. So what they had done was they actually had a delete function. Obviously no CSRF protection because it's just a get request to delete. Yeah. So what it did is it went in, the spider, it crawled and then it visited each delete link and deleted a record. No big deal, right? It's in staging. Yeah. So then they're like, oh, no. Well, yeah, that app's like a staging app, but it's connected to a production database. So we deleted like every record for their supplies. They had to like back it up. I'm like, oh my God. And, it's like, and they were furious and we had to explain it. And even then, I don't think they were happy. I mean, obviously they weren't happy, but I'm like, well, you know what? Like if you build your application like that, you just learned a couple good, you just learned a few good lessons.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Well, yeah.
Anyways,
I'm thinking of a situation that happened like not recently, and it was like testing in production, but it was supposed to be like this beta feature where they were already allowing clients into it to actually use it, which is great, right? Like that's fine. They're testing it out, but I'm able to update like basically every client's data and not realizing that it's successful until like, I'd already updated like 30 or something clients. They're like, oh, what do you think you're doing? Now we have to go back in. We don't have backups of that. And I'm like, well, dude, like I'm sorry, right? Like, I'm sorry. Like, what do you want me to say? Right? You shouldn't have had IDOR, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's the answer. The answer is you shouldn't have had IDOR. You should also like, come on, any like state changing. We preach this so often. I mean, this is just good practice. This is why you don't state changing requests require an authenticity token so that it's harder to do this stuff, So it's like, although I guess that's less of a thing now. It's pretty easy to just read a form and get a link and then have the token and send it on. But usually that stuff's configured, you have to configure that. So,
well, I mean, what is it like? Like authorization is hard, right? That's
yeah.
Like between state, CSRF tokens and just like in general, like whether or not somebody should have access to something, like it's so common. Honestly, that's the most common vulnerability I find nowadays.
Do you think people look at CSRF as authorization related protection like we do, or do you think that that's like, I don't even know. That doesn't seem debatable. It doesn't seem like it'd be I don't know. I'm not sure if everybody sees it that way.
I don't know if they do, right? Because it's such a specific and this is part of apparently we're just going off on a tangent. This is part of the problem with the OS Prop 10, right? Is like you've always had broken access control or access control authorization issues in the OS Prop 10, but this this tendency to attach values to specific types of authorization vulnerabilities means they get promoted in a different way, right? So I see the same thing with cross-site scripting and injection, right? Is like cross-site scripting is an injection vulnerability. CSRF, IDOR, they're both authorization vulnerabilities, and it seems like we're slowly fixing that. But CSRF has been out there as a vulnerability for years, and we've addressed it almost in a different way using these authenticity tokens. So it becomes like this, okay, yes, it is broken authorization, but people still list it separately, or it may not necessarily fall under that depending on your own view, right? Or your own opinion. So I guess I like opinions vary, but I think most people that are in the industry probably view it as authorization. Long-winded way to say that.
Man, I was just thinking about as you mentioned it, actually, about I was just thinking, is there, because you were talking about IDOR and some of the things we've quote unquote, gotten better at fixing or identifying. But I was just thinking man, there's so many vulnerabilities that I come across. Or I shouldn't say there's so many vulnerabilities. I should say many of the small amount of vulnerabilities I get to come across these days are so you're not going to catch with the scanner. They're so business specific that I don't even know how to describe it. It's just they're not easily. Basically, you would have to have written unit tests as you developed each of these features with an exact threat in mind, and then had built in those tests, because otherwise it's just there's no SaaS tool that even has a shot. Not because SaaS tools are whatever limited or garbage or whatever. That's not the case. I mean, they're just very business logic flaw related, and it's subtle. It's very subtle. It's very easy to miss.
Well, okay. So yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, a lot of the authorization flaws, and this is why we find so many of them, is it requires actual like human interaction to identify whether or not that should be the case. So recent assessment we're doing, we've got code, we've got an application, we find like an instance where, you know, one user logged in to an organization can see another organization's data in certain scenarios. We dig into the code, it's Java, it's basically an overloaded function that has like 3 or 4 different, like same function name with different parameters that are moving into it, all with the same name, but like one's an object and one's a string.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And it's just like, wow, like I don't, and in one of the cases, when it came in as a string versus an object, as it's coming in from, you know, the front end servlet, like they just don't, like the protections don't exist, or they return before they actually check the protections, which gave the, you know, gave the ability to actually see somebody else's data. But catching that was such a weird kind of edge case because of the number of different overloaded functions. And without access to the code, we could have never like, we would never have known that it existed. Yeah, like it just, it's so difficult to see, right? But you can exploit it, right? You know,
and that's why I was kind of
stumble onto it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking like, because yeah, so that's kind of the like, when we were talking about voting, we were talking about voting, the voting app or votes issue, votes. All that stuff going down. And I don't know if you remember, but I was pretty, I would say, nihilist about like the idea of software being, it sounds crazy for like a software security podcast, for me being like, I'm not sure it could ever be secure. But dude, how many like like long lasting libraries have you seen that were, you know, quote unquote fine for years, and then they're like, oh, this bug has been uncovered that's been sitting here for years, no matter how many eyes had looked at it, because sometimes it's just that subtle. And that's why I feel like it's such a hard problem to guarantee 100% there's no security flaw inside of code. I think we get most of the way there, but it's very difficult to, I know that sounds crazy, and like we'll be like, well, it's your job to make sure everything's secure. That's true to a degree, but there's never, as long as code keeps changing, like I you know what I mean, as it's being updated, I don't know that you'll ever get to 100%. I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
Unless it's very, okay. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. It depends on the code size. It depends on certain things, and for sure. And like, did you build custom libraries and you're not using anybody else's libraries? But see, then even there, it's like, what if you're doing like custom crypto? You shouldn't be doing that. You use a crypto library, but then that crypto library had an 8-year-old bug sitting out there. Yeah, so it's like, you know, anyways, it's just hard. It's just a hard problem to solve. I guess that's why we have a podcast.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. I don't think that it's ever going to be completely solved, right? But I mean, that's part of the reason we always harp on a layered security approach, right? That you want to fuzz your own stuff. You want to like test everything that you possibly can. But yeah, like I always think back to the beginning of kind of the, you know, security industry. And initially it was like, oh, there's these buffer overflow things, right? And everybody's like, oh crap, this is crazy, right? Look at what we can do. And then like every time there's a new class of bug that comes out, it's like, oh crap, right? Like we didn't necessarily think about that. And all it takes is one person that stumbles onto this edge case and, you know, blows the security model out of the water. We've done better at being able to limit the, you know, kind of the damage circle that, you know, that occurs from those different vulnerabilities with the layered security model. But I always think that, I'm with you. I always think there's going to be some new class that comes out. There's going to be some new approach that basically creates new security problems and security flaws in, you know, libraries or whatever else. Not to mention the whole, what are you depending on, and software composition analysis and interactions and business logic flaws that we run into.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why I think, and this is probably here in a second, a good time to loop in that conversation from Twitter about CodeQL and SaaS tools. But I actually do think that the way that AppSec's going to change is, which I think that's why I'm that tweet you brought up, and what we're going to talk about is like, I think super relevant, because I do see our jobs changing. And you mentioned just now software composition. So I think software composition is part of building a risk profile for an application. And I think where we're going is doing a better job of upfront as new features get developed, as new applications get developed, as code changes, like getting into more of a self-service risk profiling sort of scenario with devs, not like just the devs doing it, just like with them. So we all have a pretty good sense of like what our concerns are and what our risks are. And we've got like a nice little handy checklist to go through and all that. And I think what we're going to end up doing more of is two things. Unit, like whether it's unit tests or whatever it is, like more building of tests that are specific to each thing that's getting developed, right? That's one thing that we could be doing. And the second is instrumentation, which I think is where that Twitter thread was going, was a lot more instrumentation with things like CodeQL, where we're developing, maybe we have a framework like CodeQL to do static analysis and build the AST and just sort of like find issues. But like, yeah, I think a lot of it's going to be not purchasing I agree with that Twitter thread, actually. I think it's not going to be purchasing tools. I think you're going to see more of people building their own checks from tools. That's not to say there won't be a place for big box, sort of like on-prem or whatever scanners. I'm sure that those will still exist in some form. And of course, the thing is, most companies most companies, I should say, there are a lot of companies that hire generalist security and not application security. And those people are typically using a scanner because that's what they do, right? Like they've got a certain amount of scans they have to do a week, take those reports, drop it off to whoever needs to see the results. So that'll still stay. But I think if you're talking about true AppSec specific people, I think it's going to go more in the way of custom tooling and unit testing and risk profiling with developers, so that the developer from the beginning can think about this stuff themselves.
Yeah, and we should post that link at least to the beginning of the the first tweet from Omar. So Omar's been on the show before. It's been a little while, but let me see. This is the one that spurred it all, right? So he was asking specifically about Node, right? And seeing if there was any tool out there that actually detected everywhere in the code where input comes from a request body or query parameter, right? So he was thinking about writing an ESLint plugin, and from there it just kind of spirals, right? Somebody, Marcin, I think is his name, brings up CodeQL, right? Saying ESLint is great for simple security tools, and it's really easy to build a regex. We talk about this in the course if you're looking at Node.js code or JavaScript code, looking for app.get or app.post. That's a fairly easy thing to do. We're looking for where request is being called. But you can easily build that into ESLint or even CodeQL, where you're actually recognizing what objects are coming in and where they're actually coming from. But then this started to take a different take, right? Or a different path of discussion. Let's see, where is it? And it was Jim that jumped in, right? Talking about Cigital, and specifically Gary McGraw, right? Basically saying you need to hold experts at gunpoint to get them to build a good static analysis rules. So there wasn't any there's not going to be a real free tool out there because it's expensive to build. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that anymore. right?
So I don't see his response. So Jim Manico, he said, oh wait, I see Omer is,
Here,
for some reason, I don't see Jim Manic.
There's one. I just threw it into the chat if you can see it. One of them.
Oh, right. Yeah. I'm just like, which chat?
Sorry.
I'm trying to see his response. This should be interesting. It always is. This Sigil Gem is, Gary McGraw. That's Sigil Gem is Gary McGraw. And if you don't know Gary McGraw, so Gary McGraw has been in software security landscape. He was he the founder of Sigil, or was he a co-founder? I'm not clear on that.
I think he was co-founder, but I mean, he was one of the initial developers of Fortify, like the Fortify static analysis tool, right? And he had a book on static analysis that was kind of the groundbreaking. This is how you build ASTs. This is how you check for security issues in code. What was that?
Yeah.
Called?
He says but Jim Manico quoted Gary McGraw saying, "You need to hold experts at gunpoint to get them to build it." Like you said, okay. But yeah, no, I don't agree with that. And actually, Gary McGraw did reply. He said, "Indeed, when we developed the very first set of SAST rules in 1999, it took some serious doing. Later, when the technology that evolved into the Fortify engine was being developed, rules generation was a major activity and contributed a majority of actual value to the tool." Well, yeah, I mean, you have to write rules, but I think the harder part. So, let's just do like a brief for those that aren't familiar with SAST. If you're not doing something that's just like regex based, and you're actually building out what's called an abstract syntax tree, what that does is it actually parses the code to build nodes, and inside those nodes, there's some information on like sort of like it has like that's how you get your source to sync sort of trace, right? Where an input comes, where does it go? Everywhere it's processed in between. Nodes help identify, you can parse those and you can find like functions that are maybe like sketch functions, like file or system. And then you can kind of trace backwards from there, like where did it come from? And that's sort of the idea. That's like a very super high level. I'm sure I'm making Justin Collins cringe right now, but that's super high level AST, or sorry, static analysis tool, sort of the idea, how it works. So the rules are obviously the part where you're like saying, hey, these are the sketch functions I'm looking for. These are the sort of behaviors that I'm worried about, whatever. Like you can just build your rules. Well, with something like CodeQL, like that you can just play with and just use, now you can build your own set of rules. That's essentially what CodeQL allows you to do, is you can build your own rules. So I don't think here's where I think now that we're up to that point, I think what maybe they were saying was that it's hard to generate those rules. It takes a fair amount of brain power, whatever. I think that that's not true. I think that it is not as difficult or as mysterious as you would think. I think in AppSec, we understand as a fundamental requirement of being an AppSec professional. At least I think this isn't like, I don't think this is like me being crazy when I say that we should absolutely know code like as a fundamental of our job. I would hope that's not like a crazy thing to say. But anyways,
so Ken, this goes back to like static analysis tools and how they were built initially, and they were targeted at security people, right? They were targeted at someone that could kind of read pseudocode, but wasn't necessarily a developer. And so like, and maybe they would dispute that. Maybe Gary would dispute it, that it was, hey, guess what? No, we were looking and we're trying to embed things in the IDE for developers. And I know they pushed that direction, but the primary consumer of those static analysis tools was not the developer initially. It was compliance and security. And so like they would, run a report. Like I was in multiple like sales calls back in the day where Fortify and AppScan Source were coming in, or Ounce at the time. They weren't talking to developers. They were talking to the CISO, they were talking to the security director, and they're like, look, this tool will secure your code, right? That was the selling point. And this is where, and I think that's where this disconnect is. I absolutely agree with you as far as like being an application security person. You've got to know code. You understand what an abstract syntax tree is. I can't speak today, apparently. But you understand what an AST is. And you understand that it's really like what's happening when you ask CodeQL a question is it's traversing the tree and it's saying, okay, show me all the instances of this tree where you see something from request to like, SQL.call or whatever it is, right?
.raw.
.raw, exactly. That's one of that's a rule that you can write. And if you understand, like you can model this out simply in your own head as far as, hey, can I trace and see like this, request.param goes to this function, to this function, to this function, and then which calls SQL.raw. Hey, guess what? There's a pathway there, right? That's all that static analysis is doing. The beauty of it is building that abstract syntax tree, holding it in memory, and being able to trace everything down in it quickly, right?
Right.
But and I'm not sure where you were going. I kind of interrupted. I'm sorry about that. But I think the initial problem is like who they were selling those static analysis tools to. And developers, they started to get the result, 50,000 findings coming out of Fortify, 98% of them, were either like very low risk or, didn't realize that this one function cleaned stuff up as it was coming in. That kind of stuff really soured the development community on static analysis tools.
Yeah, the way it was used as kind of like, because I had definitely seen it used in a way where like they dropped a stack of findings and with no context or like validation of the findings. And it was just, when I say they, I mean a security generalist who was just like, I got to run my scan. This is what, and honestly, you can't, here's the other thing. Can you really blame them too much? Because when you look at like something such as, we'll say, I don't know, Retina or Nessus, like going back in the day a little bit, those are, they're not, this is not to say they definitely have false positives. 100% they have false positives. But I think it's a little more black and white to a degree. It's like if I say that this port's open and it's clearly not open, or if I say this like operating system is outdated and it's not even the right operating system, which is I've definitely seen happen. It's probably, but like if you don't understand AppSec super well, that's not what you do for a living. It's kind of hard to interpret those results, especially when there's like 3,000 of them and probably 2,900 of them are just the same XSS of one line of code that if you changed it gets rid of those findings. But anyways, where I was going with it though is that if you are in AppSec, you probably know how to code, you probably have built an application or two, and it's not so crazy to think that you could build, because their argument was basically like rule generation is difficult, right? That's why it was expensive. That's why it was pricey, and that's why at least maybe I think that's how I'm interpreting what they're saying. Like they're saying that's the reason it's hard to get people to give that stuff that's quality away for free. Which I think Brakeman and Justin Collins are like one example of where that argument falls down completely. And secondly, with CodeQL and like you said, being able to have the ability to just basically query for the things you're worried about, like, yeah, I think it's very easy to take an AppSec skill and apply it to that and create rules, and that's fine. And give it away? Sure, why not? Why wouldn't I give it away? Honestly, if I build with CodeQL something that really works for Golang and Mux, or something that really works well with Node and Express, why the fuck would I have like any reason to keep that just to myself? You know what I mean? Like certainly business like IPs specific to our authorization or specific to our cases, that's different when you build checks for that. But if it's just generic checks for like those types of frameworks, I don't see why I wouldn't give that away. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Well, yeah. And I mean, because on the SEML site, right? Like I keep looking at all the different like call graphs and like tools that are out there, and like it's all about the industry as a whole leveling up, right? For lack of a better term. And if we can provide some of those tools and the ability to run them and to build an abstract syntax tree for, extremely low cost, all it does is it makes things better for everyone across the board.
Well, look what you have now. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I struggle with, right, walking into so many different organizations as a consultant is the level of maturity from one org to the next dictates the level of application security. So I still run into the organizations where there's one security guy who they hired a couple of years in. Security person. Yep. One security person. And they're trying to do everything from container security to scanning to PCI to like AppSec. And so they like the developers may or may not have a security bent to them. But even if they do, there's not a lot of support for, right, like actually spending time on security issues versus features, right? And then there's that organization that I see more often than I probably wish to admit. And then there's the flip side where you've got a dedicated team of, application security people that have security champions in every single dev team. And I'm looking at one single feature and like it as an outsider, I'm just validating that they're doing what they should be doing. But it's very rare that I find this high security or a high severity vulnerability in that code base. It's a lot easier when the people don't look at it, right? So, yeah.
I mean, and think about this, man. All right, so Node.js scan, Brakeman. What's that one? What's the one we for Django? We talk about it.
Are you thinking like
Python.
Bandit?
Bandit, yeah, sorry, Bandit. Just like to name a few, right? There's like GoSec, I think, is what the one for Golang. So everybody's building their own frameworks for static analysis as it is in each individual language as it is. So now you have like a unified, whether it's CodeQL or whether it's another one or two, like you have a pretty, you now are coming into a place where we've got kind of like a unified way of writing checks for multiple languages and frameworks, right? I mean, not everything's supported with it right now, but they're adding to it. So I guess what I'm saying is you had to write those tools, the way they interface, how they behave, and then write checks, and people still gave it away for free. Now imagine just all you do is write checks. That's it. Yeah. And you can give that away for free, no problem. I mean, honestly, we're talking about this, and there probably is some sort of like repo stood up right now to like share checks for CodeQL. If we were to Google it. Anyways, so actually, which I'm going to do that, but because now I'm curious, like, I'm sure somebody has to be. Yeah. Anyways, so that's I don't know. Like, I just think that that's where our jobs are going for AppSec pros, which it may even become a consulting thing, right? Like if you run you run a consultancy. Yeah, I mean, and it sounds like that's a sort of where you've been kind of going, and we're because of customers driving it, really, where they want more. Well,
like, they do.
Yeah,
because that goes back to the fuzzing that I was talking about previously, right? Is that I'm getting customers that are asking for, hey, like, let's not just do a dynamic scan, right? Like, yes, like we need to do that, right? To validate that everything is, but give me something that I can put into my pipeline that's going to check for, cross-site scripting and SQL injection in the places where it's appropriate. I mean, obviously, this is where, Sputter, like that talk that I did at Black Hat a couple of years ago, that was the whole point of that as well. But I am seeing more and more people concerned about that rather than just the strict dynamic side of things, for sure.
Yeah. Sorry, I was looking for that. I was looking for that link. I'm sure that exists. I should know this actually, because it should be part of my. I've been so busy, man. Like,
yeah,
I've been wanting to dig in more with CodeQL, but it's just we had satellite, and yeah. Did I mention what happens with satellite cycles? Sort of satellite universe.
Yeah. You've talked about it before, just because everybody's releasing features, so you guys get slammed from make sure this is secure before we announce it and give it out to the world.
Yeah, exactly. Last week it finally kind of like slowed down a little bit. Plus you get this is an interesting thing too for anybody who runs a bug bounty. If you do like a thing like that where you release some features, and you start to beta people in, you're gonna get reports. It's like probably gonna get reports. You should always prepare. Basically what I'm saying is probably don't schedule PTO for like or don't schedule half your team. Not that that's an issue for us. I'm just saying, like, if you're in like planning phases, obviously you probably want to keep some staff around for the first couple weeks after you ship something, just to handle and triage bug bounty reports or anything like that. So, because you're going to get some in, and I'm not saying they're even like valid, but you need somebody there to triage them and take a look to see if they're valid or not.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah.
And sometimes you just have like a known list of things internally that you're tracking. And so they might be valid, but you need that, like, your team on hand to say like, oh yeah, we already identified that. It's just something we're working on fixing, or we know about it, but we don't care. We had this discussion. So, yep. So, or I shouldn't say care. It's not really a risk. So, did you find anything? You look very pensive.
No, sorry. Like, now I'm digging into Medium posts on CodeQL, and it's just all like the fact that we're recording a podcast just went out the window. So there you go. That's where I'm at today.
That's where I think I'm at too. Dude, I told you like last week, man, from Friday, I had 4 projects scheduled that day, Friday. I took PTOs just to do like things like get my documents together for taxes and get like my life in order and get some pet projects done. Bro, that faucet issue. So just real briefly, it started around noon. I was like, I'm going to take care of this, taking out my old faucet, which I installed originally in my kitchen sink. And like that freaking nut that's underneath that you usually just use a basin wrench. It was so bad that like when I finally had to call out a plumber because I broke that pipe and had to turn water off to my house, which is how that day went. Like at 9 o'clock, I'm having a guy in my house like fix the plumbing. Anyways, he had to use a saw to cut the sink off because the mineral deposits were so heavy and so difficult that he couldn't himself get that old sink that I put on, or that old faucet that I put on off. Jeez. So yeah, man, it was a nightmare day. It was fine. I just kind of rolled with the punches, but it was a crazy day, man. Like I was sitting there working on the pipe and my shoulder hit this brittle PVC pipe, and all of a sudden I got hot water, like really hot water, all on my face. I'm like running to the basement blind to cut off the water. It was a heck of a day. So yeah, it's been sort of projects like that. So I'm feeling it today, man.
Yeah. It sounds like it, right? For sure. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Home improvement takes it out of you.
It does. A home is a hobby. It's not an investment. Just anybody that's out there, right? That's what it becomes.
Not an investment. Not a good investment.
You're probably better. Yeah. You're better off. It's great to have a place to live and all blah, blah, blah. But yeah.
Yeah. I'm kidding. I'm not a financial advisor, clearly, if I'm just now getting my tax documents together.
Yeah. I don't know. To go back to, CodeQL though, and fuzzing is I don't know. Like I would like to see more of this happening as well, right? It's definitely just certain organizations that come in and ask for that sort of feedback. So like if anyone is interested, right, like in code review to the style of, hey, we're building tests so you can actually like test your code, reach out, or jump in the Absolute AppSec channel. We'd love to chat about it. Or Stefan always has opinions on that kind of stuff as well, right? If you want Logical to either help you become a nihilist or, try and convince him otherwise. I don't know, however you want to do it.
Are we still talking about that thing that Stefan's in?
Yeah.
Are we talking about that yet or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can watch for it, right? Like we're going to do a Midsummer Nights Con is what we're calling it. Sponsored by or presented by Logical and Absolute AppSec, which is going to be just a short virtual conference, technical talks. So far, we've got at least 3 or 4 people lined up. We'll announce it and throw up a website here shortly. But yeah, I think we're gonna go for it, right? So it'll be Midsummer Night, whatever that is, July 24th, I think, or June 24th.
And I got Stefan to promise me that he would do a keynote about software composition, like the history of software and software composition, and also like where security came into that, and then like basically like a brief history of software and security. So he agreed to it. So it's like, man, can you imagine him who's like, if you don't know anything about Stefan, man, don't ever try to don't come in with just a little bit of knowledge on a subject with history with him, because he will set you straight. He will, he knows a lot.
He'll give you the background on it all, and there's previous episodes with Stefan. I'm sure you can jump in there. And actually, him and Brian that are joining us, or who is it, in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think it's next week. Hold on, let me see. I think it is next week, which I'm really excited for. Brian's done a lot of work with the university, and he's a professor. For those that don't know, Brian Glass is a professor, and next week's May 26th. Yeah, that's going to be them next week. Okay, sweet. Yep. So Stefan will be on next week. If you want to derail our conversation, come in and ask some random question about a compiler from 1982, and off we go. So. Just honestly come up with that's what I'm going to do, man. I'm going to come up with the most obscure language nobody's ever heard of, and I'm going to drop it on him and see what he knows. And that's going to be my don't tell anybody, YouTubers or people watching, whatever you want to, I don't know what you call. Don't tell anybody. I'm going to spring something on him. Sweet. Okay. We'll do some research. So, Midsummer Nights Con, it will be on June 24th, but watch this space for additional details. It's all just going to be online for free. The tagline is a virtual InfoSec conference for digital wizards, electronic witches, and virtual adepts. What the fuck? It's going to be amazing. That's all I got to say. So, wow. That's awesome. That's amazing. That's cool. So yeah, we're working through organizing that. I don't know, Ken, we haven't talked about doing training or anything like that. I think it will just be an online conference, but we might do a training session or something like that connected to it on the code review side. So depending on how much time and effort you and I decide we want to put into it. So, outside of that, Ken, we're almost at an hour, not quite, but what else is going on? What else do you want to talk about today? Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure what I want to talk about. I don't think I have too much to really to chat about. Honestly, I've just been trying to make it through this. In where we're at, so I know a lot of places are reopening, but we have this weird thing in Virginia where the northern Virginia area, which is we'll say I think it's pretty safe to say within a 30-minute or 30-mile sort of distance to DC is kind of considered Nova. And then past that, I don't know. But the rest of Virginia is reopening as of yesterday, reopening phase 1. So slowly trickling back in. But for whatever reason, I think it's because we are a densely populated area here in Northern Virginia. There's 4 counties, and those 4 counties asked the governor, which he obliged, to delay phase 1 reopening until I want to say it's like the first week of June or maybe it's May 28th and then reassess. I think their primary concern is to keep our hospitals from being, overloaded, just because we are like a more densely populated, higher case count. So I get it. It sucks, obviously, because, it's like we've all been stuck in this situation. At the same time, I don't know about you, but I'm not really any rush to, I want the phases to begin for sure. I mean, who doesn't want life to start to go back to normal? But what I don't want is to be inconvenienced, because I'm a very selfish, lazy person. So I kind of want to wait until all the phases are done and everything's back open until I do anything again, just because I don't want to deal with I don't know, I just don't want to deal with the annoyances that we've been dealing with, where it's like it's not that big a deal, right? But it's annoying. I say it's not that big of a deal for the things that you consider annoying. Like you have to maybe wait a little bit longer in line, or you got 6 feet. I'm not talking about I am certainly not talking about people that lost their businesses or, are going through financial hardship. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the things that I consider minor so I want basically all that shit to go away before I go outside again. So all phases done before I and it's not because of some political reason. It's because I'm lazy and I don't want to deal with horse shit and extra annoyances. And so whatever.
Yeah. I don't know. I have a hard time getting out there, and feels like people are pretty inconsiderate about how everybody else is dealing with things. Right. If you're somebody that has to work at a grocery store, you would prefer to see everybody wear a mask because you don't know where the hell they've been, right?
Right.
And then you got the people outside that are arguing about, that infringes on my rights. And I'm like, yeah, but you not doing that infringes on someone else's rights, and I just, then the economy definitely needs to restart. And I don't know, travel's going to be weird for a long time. And I just,
yeah, that's what I really don't want to do. This is actually something I mentioned last night, because it's on the same note of obviously I'm not a lazy, selfish person. I'm joking, but to some degree we all are, right? We're all a little sort of I don't want to be inconvenienced. But in that same conversation, that was the other thing I mentioned, was that basically that I don't want to deal with I don't know how to say this. Yeah. I'm not sure how to phrase this. I just don't want to deal with sort of I really don't know how to explain this without, I don't know how to phrase this. So I just don't want to schedule a trip, I guess, right now. You know what I mean? I don't want to schedule a trip to a conference, and have that canceled, because I don't know if there's going to be, I don't know how to say it. It's flare-ups. Is that the right way to say it? A flare, or whatever they're calling it when it reemerges. Is it a flare-up? I don't know the term.
Flare-up, second outbreak, whatever you want to call it.
Second outbreak. Yeah, whatever. I don't want that to happen. And then even though you can you can usually cancel your flight or your hotel or whatever for free these days when this emergency shit happens. But who's going to want to really book a vacation for the rest of the year? Or I know that I really want to do Loco Moco Sec in November. I'm genuinely concerned though, what if they shut things down again? I think I would, because of the fact they'll refund, not Loco Moco, I mean airlines and hotels and stuff. I think it's probably fine for that to do turn a work trip into a vacation type deal where you have the two. But still, even then, it's I don't know. It's a weird vibe, man. Is that the right thing to do to go traveling around too? What if you spread it around and you don't even know you're an asymptomatic carrier, and then we're in this shit show again, and it's I just don't know, man. It's very complex situation. I don't pretend to know the ins and outs. That's why with the mask thing, like you said, I mean, I've seen reasons why some people sort of like have their political views on it. I tend to, when it comes to science, think more about science than politics, but, weird, right? But like the CDC said on their site, unless you're 2 years of age and under, put a mask on. So, I mean, I don't know if it's going to fucking work at all. Like, I have no idea. I don't think any of it. I mean, like, maybe that's all for show, and we're going to look back in like 10 years and think we're idiots. But for right now, I'm wearing it because scientists said that it might be the right thing to do. So it's, it's like, I don't pretend to know, man. It's just a hard situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the very least, everyone's going through it, right? Like it's all, yeah.
Well, like, I know I've been like going on a tangent, but one last thing that's fucking annoying is like you sit there and you follow, you wear the mask, people do the gloves even, that's fine. But then like I watch people just completely doing shit that just throws that out the window. Like, like touching everything and then like touching their face, the gloves on, and you're just like, I mean, I'm not really to be fair. Like, I just want to be clear. I'm not afraid for me or my family. We're healthy. Like, I'm not worried, but I am worried for other people. So everything I do, I think it's the same notion of what you're saying. Is like everything I'm doing is just for other people. It's not for me. It's not for my family. Like we're very healthy people. Yeah.
And I mean, there's some concerns too. Cause with like, well, you just don't know how it manifests. Like, it's really weird. And like, again, the scientific community is like, we don't know, right? Like, this is so new. It could be that, it makes your big toe grow 10 sizes too big or some shit like that.
Yeah. So there's new data
like,
all the time.
Yeah. So until they figure it out, it does feel premature to schedule too much. But I mean, I'm hoping that stuff will calm back down, right? Like initially I was hoping, that DEF CON would happen again, right? And that we'd be able to all get together, but yeah.
I'm torn, man. I'm torn. Yeah. I want it to happen, but I'm like, it's dicey. It's dicey scheduling. So
it just feels like 2020 is going to be, the year of staying at home, and then we'll slowly get back to whatever the new normal is going to be. So
yeah.
Anyway,
ready for this horse shit to end. This year can go kick rocks as far as I'm concerned. So
yep. Anyway, well, cool. So we'll have Stefan and Brian on next week. I'm sure we'll talk some OWASP top 10 and other things because Brian's heavily involved in that project. It'll be some nihilist conversations with Logical. And it'll be a fun time. It always is when those guys come on. Otherwise, fuzz your stuff, right? If you've got questions or you want to talk about how an approach to do that, please jump in to Twitter DMs or even just Twitter public or our Absolute AppSec Slack channel. Would love to talk to you about it and how you're approaching it, as opposed to the stuff that we do, because there's many different nuances to fuzzing in general. So, or static analysis or anything else we talk about. So, all right. Well, then I guess we'll call it for today. We'll see everybody next week. Ken, any last minute items?
Nope. Thank you everybody for watching. And thank you. Just thank you to everybody.
All right.
You're keeping us sane as much as we're keeping you sane. So cool. More, you're keeping me personally more sane by the podcast. So
sweet. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good day.
All right.